はい、皆様、本日はご視聴いただきありがとうございます。この対談の司会進行を務めさせていただきます、国際交流基金マニラ日本文化センターの鈴木と申します。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
よろしくお願いします。
今回は、お願いします。今回はFUJITA Takahiroさん、そしてマントジプシーのスタッフの皆さんと、フィリピンの全国に散らばる総勢24名の俳優とのコラボレーションを進めています。家のようなものをテーマに、オンラインでワークショップを実施して、それを受けてFUJITAさんによる新作戯曲の書き下ろし、そして演出していただいた作品を映像にして発表するという試みです。
はい。はい、
では、早速トークに入りますが、今日はそのFUJITAさん、そしてフィリピン側のですね、ゲストとして、今回のプロジェクトにも参加していただいている、今フィリピンで最も注目されている演劇人の一人である、ゲラン・バレラ・ルアルカさんに加わっていただいて、フィリピンと日本をオンラインでつないで進めてまいります。そして通訳をユミカルデルさんにお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
はい。では、本題に入る前に、ゲランさん、突然ですけど、お誕生日を教えていただけますか？
Okay, so before we start the actual talk, Guelan, when is your birthday?
April 27, 1991.
4月27日、1991年です。
おー、すげえ。どういうこと全く年も
FUJITAさん is saying, what? What?
はい、これね、今ちょっとサプライズだったんですけど、実は偶然にお二人、ジェネレーション近いんですけどもね、誕生日もご一緒ということで、何か縁を。
も一緒だけど、全然年下じゃない。
So this is a surprise for all of us that although they're not in the same generation, their birthdays are exactly the same.
Oh, really? Wow.
本当ですか？
だよ。85年生まれの4月27だから。
So he's 1985, April 27. So yeah.
He's my older brother.
私のお兄さん、兄ですね。
はい。ということで、お互い、これでバッチリと気心を知れたということで、それでは内容に入りますが、まず、FUJITAさんにお伺いしますね。FUJITAさんは高校の時に演劇部に入っておられて、全国大会にも出られたし、その後、東京の大学では、フィリピンでも2018年にマニラノートを演出されてます、平田織田さんから、教えても受けていて、いわゆる私から見ると失礼ですが、演劇の王道を歩んでこられたような印象なんですけども、そもそもその演劇を志されたきっかけなんていうのを教えていただければと思うんですが、いかがでしょうか？
Now that your birthdays are the same, parang there's a relaxing na kayo, no, because of that, diba? So we can start the actual talk right now. So he's asking Mr. FUJITA-san, so FUJITA-san, you have been in the stage, the art, no, of stage and performance since high school. And he even ended up, I think, in one of those awarded in terms of the national awards in terms of play. So, and after high school and university, back in 2018, we had this Manila Notes shown in the Philippines by the great Mr. Hirata. And we heard that he also became your professor, no, when you were studying. So it seems that FUJITA-san, you have been living through this amazing life as a professional. So I'd like to ask you, first of all, how did you end up starting in theater?
僕は北海道の伊達市っていうところで育ったんですけど、そこに市民劇団というか、劇団があって、そこに10歳で入りましたね。小学校
So I'm from Hokkaido, Date City in Hokkaido, and I grew up there. And in that city, there's this theater group by the city. And I was 10 years old when I actually joined that theater group run by the city.
だから最初は子役でずっと演劇やってて、で、そこの演出家の影山先生っていう先生が、子 高校の先生でもあるんですよ。で、その高校もその町の中にあったので、伊達緑が丘高校って言うんですけど、その高校に、子役からずっと指導を受けてた先生の演劇部があるっていうから入ったっていう感じです。で、
その高校にですね。
その高校にね。はい。で、その高校で、さっきも鈴木さんが言ってくれたように、全国大会に行くような高校だったので、で、その大会の審査員をしてたのが平田織座さんだった。そうそう。
Okay. Okay. So, so since 10 years old, I started. So, my initial role was as a child, a children's role. And so, throughout that time, the director, who was there, was Mr. Kageyama. And Mr. Kageyama was actually also a high school teacher. And the high school he taught was also within the city. So, it's called the Date Midorigaoka High School. And I heard that he's also teaching I think the club of a theater club in that high school. So I heard about that already. That's why I chose that high school, so that I can join the theater group that Mr. Kageyama was handling. And then also, as Mr. Suzuki said, in high school, we qualified, our school qualified for like this nationwide competition. So they represented, in that nationwide competition. And actually, Mr. Oriza Hirata was a judge when we qualified and when I was there.
それで大学にもその流れで、平田織座さんがいるっていうことでその大学に入るんだけど、僕が大学2年生の時に平田織座さん辞めちゃうのよ、その大学。そうそう。
Okay, so just like in high school, I heard this time I heard that Mr. Oriza Hirata teaches in this certain university, which is why I chose that university, to be under him. Unfortunately, when I was in second year college, he left the university.
はい。まず大学まではそんな感じです。大丈夫。
So yeah, that's my story until my university years.
はい。コミュニティシアターって結構、フィリピンではたくさんあるような気がしますが、日本ではあんまり少ないのかなと思うんですけど、やっぱその最初の出会いがとても幸運だったってことなんでしょうかね。
そうなんですかね。
So we heard that in the Philippines, community theater is quite common. It's everywhere. But I wasn't sure that there was a lot in Japan. But I guess, being very young and having entered that community theater really was, a serendipitous thing for you, I believe. So and Fujita-san said, yes, I think so.
はい。では、今日はですね、それから主にフィリピンの方々に藤田さんをご紹介するので、私自身が見たことのある2つの作品に絞ってですね、少しお話を伺います。でまずは、コクーンです。
Now, we'd like to introduce Mr. Fujita to the Philippine audience. So I would like to just, just choose two of his works and maybe talk about it, just so that the Philippine audience will get to know Mr. Fujita better. So first, I'd like to talk about Cocoon.
はい。これは第二次世界大戦の際の、沖縄での米軍との戦闘、その時に、負傷兵を看護した女子学生たちの、悲劇を描いたものなんですけども、これ日本で大変評判になって、再演も重ねられていると思いますけども、藤田さんは、戦争を知らない世代としてね、この作品に寄せた思いというか、どういうことを若い人たち、自分たちも含めて伝えていきたかったのかということをお聞かせいただけますでしょうか。
So in Cocoon, this is staged in World War II in the Okinawa island, where the Japanese and the United States had their battle. And it's a story about this group of females, I guess students, young ladies, who took care of the injured soldiers. So now I'd like to ask Mr. Fujita, who actually does not know anything about the war. He wasn't born during the war. What was your feeling? What was the intention of you in creating this work? What was the message that you want, people of the other generation, including yours, to learn or to get from your work?
うん。もともと、このコクーンっていう作品は、京マツコさんっていう漫画家の方が原作で、の作品だったんですよ。で、なんとなく、戦争を描くっていうのは、結局、すごく難しいバランス感覚が必要とされるんですけど、なんかその中で、京マツコさんのひめゆり学徒隊をモチーフにして、描いた作品に出会ったときに、こういうふうに戦争とか、あの時代の沖縄っていうものを、こういう手つきで描けるんだなっていうふうに驚いたんですよ。で、これだったら、僕も戦争っていうモチーフを、舞台にも上げれるかもしれないっていうふうに、思って取り組み始めたのがコクーンっていう企画だったんですね。
So Cocoon originally is a manga, cartoon, a Japanese manga that was written by Matsuko Kyo. So that was her original work. Now, when you talk about this theme, no, it really needs this really very difficult balancing act in creating this to tell these kinds of stories. And so when I encountered or when I met this this manga and I read it, I realized that it was interesting on how she was able to write about war. I learned that's on way. It was surprising for me on how the Okinawa situation was written out or expressed by her. So when I saw that, that gave me an idea that in that case, I can also use that same theme of that war that happened in Okinawa and put it in as a stage play. So yeah, that was the start of how Cocoon was created.
うん。それで、もちろん僕もそうなんですけど、その漫画家の京マチコさんもそうだし、そこに関わったキャストも、音楽家もみんな戦争を知らない、世代ですよね。で、あともう一つ、その沖縄っていう土地で生まれて育ったわけでもない僕らが、どうしてその沖縄戦のことを、モチーフに描けるのかっていうことを、ずっと今も考え続けてるんですけど、僕が大切だなと思ってるのは、その沖縄出身じゃなくても沖縄のことを扱っていいと思ってるし、戦争を知らなくても戦争のことを扱ってもいいと思うんですよ。で、そこに、なんだろうな、知らない世代とか、知らない土地のことに、どこまで手を伸ばすことができるかっていうことを、してみたかったというか、僕らがその土地のこととかその時代のことを知らないから知らなくていいってことにはならないような気がしていて、なので、なんとなくそこを、ずっと考え続けてるんですけど、演劇って表現自体も、そういう作業でもあるような気がしてるんですね。例えばだから、観客の皆さんも、劇場ですごく特殊な物語に触れるわけなんだけど、それはそこに行ったことがないわけなんだけど、そこに、その時代のことを想像したり、その土地のことを想像するっていう、演劇っていうのはそういうものでもあると思うので、なんとなく作り手の僕らも、知らない時代とか知らない土地を想像することが重要な気がしています。
Okay, so just like Mr. Kyo Matsuko and myself and the cast and the musicians that were involved in creating the Cocoon, none of us have experienced war. We weren't born then, and none of us are also from Okinawa. We weren't born there. We didn't grow up there. And so maybe some people will wonder, how come someone who's never been in war, who's never been, born or grew up in Okinawa, write about war in Okinawa? And actually, to be honest, I still think about it sometimes, not even until now. But I feel that what's important is it doesn't have to be just because I wasn't there during the war. I can't write about war. Just because I cannot, I didn't grow up in Okinawa. I cannot write about Okinawa. I don't think so. I think it's okay. For all of us, if we weren't in a certain place or in a certain time, how will we be able to understand when we talk about a place or a period that we are not familiar with, that we don't know? Is it okay that we don't know? Is it okay that we don't know that place? Is it okay that we don't know that time? And I think that theater is one of those places, because when you go into theater, you're presented a place or a situation that is actually very unique and very different, that no one has ever been in, which is why a place where the audience gets to imagine being there, experiencing what's that experience in that play. And so it helps you imagine. It helps you imagine those places, those periods, those times. And so, as I said, until now, I do still think about that work and, process it, no? Until now. Yeah.
はい、ありがとうございました。今日なんでこんな話をしたかっていうと、やはりその沖縄っていうところが、フィリピンの人と同じように沖縄の人もやっぱりその、戦争とそれからアメリカ軍との関係で犠牲になっている。そしてそれを漫画で描いた人とか、藤田さんのように演劇で描いている人がいるということをフィリピンの方にもちょっと覚えておいていただきたいなということでご紹介しました。国運という作品です。
なんて言うんだろうな、なんか日本の戦争を描くってことはさ、対アメリカだけじゃないんだよね。もうやっぱりその頃の日本政府とか日本の軍隊の話にもなるから、それがちょっとフィリピンとつながるよね。だから日本があの頃の日本がフィリピンにしたことっていうのも確実にあるし、なんかそのことと国運っていうのはなんか無関係ではないなっていうのは、国運で描いてるのは対アメリカだけじゃないんだよね。やっぱり日本がしたことでもあるっていう。しかも最後の終戦間際でもう最後の地上戦になった時に、寄せ集めの日本人がそこに来ちゃったわけだから、それで混乱したっていうのもあるわけでしょ。だから、ね、大変ですね。
Okay. So, Mr. Suzuki said that the reason why he chose Cocoon as one of the work that to talk about here is because, well, when we talk about war and then when we talk about, the U.S. being involved, Philippines is not, unfamiliar with that. No, we're quite familiar with that situation. And it would be also interesting to let Filipino audience know that there are manga and there are theater works that has that theme in Japan. And now Mr. Fujita wanted to interject there. No, he said, to be honest, the work that I made, Cocoon, isn't just about, Japan against the US. Actually, he writes about, what the Japanese government did. What was the situation within that government? So he's also looking at the perception of him, to the Japanese government. So he wanted to just emphasize that maybe, perhaps, that time, it was the last ditch effort of that war of Japan. And so like the remaining soldiers gathered in Okinawa, so they all ended up there. And then they all just, there was also this conflict within Japan because of that situation that happened, because of what is happening in Okinawa. So Fujita-san feels that perhaps even that, that conflict where that other people came and then they created conflict in that location is something also Filipinos can relate to. So it's not just, it was Japan against US. That's not the only thing that the Filipinos can find familiarity with, but also on what is happening within Japan at that time. So he just wanted to reiterate that there's other things that can be learned or I guess see something familiar in his play Cocoon.
はい。それとですね、ではもう一つの作品は、今回の作品ともテーマが近いと思うんですけども、帰りの合図、待ってた食卓、そこきっとについて伺います。
Okay, so next he will ask about the next work that he's done, Home, Waiting Dining Table, A World of Falling Salt.
はい、物語は上京して故郷を思う3兄弟の記憶をたどっていくというような構成になっているようですけども、この芝居の演出には非常に特徴的な、リフレーン、繰り返しという手法が使われていて、それは他の藤田さんの多くの作品にも 用いられていますけども、そこでこの作品に込めた思いと、なぜそのリフレーンという手法を用いるのか、そのあたりについて伺えればと思います。
So the next, the story behind the story of this play is that there are three brothers who used to live in, you know, I guess they are now living outside of where they were born, where they grew up. So it's a story of them missing, you know, their hometown, where they come from. And so, in this play and in many of the works of Mr. Fujita, it seems that the refrain, the way of doing the play is in refrain. So it seems that Fujita-san likes to, you know, interject refrains in his work, and even his other works. So we'd like to know, you know, where that does that come from? You know, what is his feeling or idea behind, you know, doing that kind of, I guess, style of playwriting?
なんですかね。ちょっともうね、思い出せない部分もあるんだけど、あの頃、20代の半ばだったんですよね。それで、鈴木さんも、見に来てくれた作品で、なんだろうな、自分の家族とか、自分と、自分の一番深いところにある感情みたいなことをどう描くかっていうことをあの頃すごい考えていて、ただすごい直接的に誰かを失って、家族の誰かを失って悲しいとかっていう感情だけじゃなくて、なんとなくその、お家の中の間取りとか、お家の中でどういう記憶があったみたいなことを、できるだけこう、なんだろうな、自分の中で物理的なレベルでこう精査しながら、どう描くことができるのかってことをずっと実験的にやってた気がするの。で、その中で、こう繰り返し、リフレインって言ってるのは繰り返し同じシーンを実際に上演時間の中でも描くことっていうのが、誰かが何かを思い出すときに繰り返し思い出すような感じで、記憶期間のことをやってるというか、記憶自体のことをやってるみたいな、手法につながってったんじゃないかなと思いますね。だから今言ってくれたように、初期の作品、僕の初期の作品の中で代表する作品ではあるんですけど、なんだろうな。すんごい大きなフィクションを描くというよりは、本当に自分の中にある物語をどういうふうに物語っていくかっていうことをあの頃すごい考えてた気がします。
Okay. So I don't really remember much about my mid-20s. I remember that, in that sense, I remember that Mr. Suzuki also came to watch that play. But in terms of my mid-20s as a whole, I don't really remember much. But one thing was that I was thinking about my family. I was thinking about the deepest feeling inside me that I had during that time, and how I would be able to express that. In theater, how will I be able to really express these things? It's not the feeling that I have wasn't just, the sadness that I felt because I lost someone close to me, someone died close to me. It's not just that, it's something more. And so I would think about, my home, the layout of my home, and all these things that I would recall. And I will try to recall it in a very physical way. And then that's when, while I was thinking and recalling these things, that I thought of, it's a refrain. It's always refrain. In your mind, you refrain, you go back to that scene again and again. So it's like going through the refrain of that. So it's really going through my memories, going back through my memories. And so when it comes to it was one of the play that we're talking about is really, it represents one of the best of my earlier works. And so I didn't think of really coming up with something big, like a big production or something. It was really more of, something, how I felt and what I was thinking, what I was going through. So even in the play, it's like, when something triggers, you remember it and you remember it again. So in the play, it's also like that, it's like, it's refrained because it's remembered again. So that's how it came about.
はい。
だから、なんか、当時さ、だからリフレインなんて言葉なかったよね。だからリピートするっていう、まあ、ただ繰り返すってことはあっても、なんかリフレインっていうか、まあだからこの感情の傘が上がっていくというか、一回さっきやったシーンが全く同じように繰り返されるわけではないみたいなことをみんな形容してくれたんだろうね、リフレインって言葉で。
Okay, so during that time in Japan, no, there was no such word as refrain. Yeah, they knew repeat, or they used the word do it again, you know, but there was really not a word refrain. But when you think about it, you know, when you think back at things, you know, I guess, I don't know how he expressed it, but you kind of get a little tense or something. And if you think about it, when you in the play, right, when you do the scene and you do it again, it's never exactly the same as the one before. So that's also something that stuck with me, you know, in this, you know, and I think in doing that the refrain is not exactly the same is where the word refrain caught on.
なるほどね。まあ、よくわかりますね。今の藤田さんのお話に出てきた家とか間取りとか記憶っていう問題は、だから今回脚本を拝見したときに、すぐにこの作品を思い浮かべたんですよね。まあ、でもこの話ちょっと、後半の方で伺うとして、次のちょっと質問に移りますね。
はい。
So, okay, thank you for explaining that. I understand now. Now, when we talk about home and the layout of the house and the memories, when I realized when I read the work that you did for this project, I actually remembered this play we were just talking about because of some similarities. But then we will be talking about that later on. So I'd like to go to the next question that I have.
はい、もう一つだけ藤田さんに質問ですけども、
はい、
国際共同制作っていう意味では、まあ、今回東南アジアでは初めてということなんですが、はい、イタリアの演劇人とはまあ長い間続けてらっしゃるっていうふうに変わってますので、
そうですね。はい。
はい、まあ、それについてまあどんな発見があったのかなっていうのを教えていただけますですかね。
いや、もうなんかイタリア。
So in terms of international collaborative work, I've learned that with any Southeast Asian country, this is your first time. But I also learned that with Italy, you have been doing a lot with them. So if you could share with us about that experience. どうぞ。
イタリアの皆さんとはもう結構もう数年4、5年やってるかな。4、5年作業していて、で、まあ、日本人の俳優も連れて、で、イタリアの俳優と一緒に、もう、イタリアでもやってるし、日本でもやってるっていうのをずっとこう、往復し続けてる感じなんですよ。で、やっぱりやってて、毎回新しい発見があるというか、まあ、やっぱりもう、なんだろうな、話聞いてるだけで、違う文化が、やっぱり彼らの体にあるから、その俳優としてどうこうっていうよりも、なんだろうな、やっぱり全然、食べるものからして違ったり、観点が全然考え方の観点が違うから、それを、インタビューしていくわけですけど、そのインタビューしていく中で、もう全然、日本の俳優とだけ作品作ってても違うところまで手が届くというか、自分ってこういうモチーフも描けるんだってことを、再発見していくっていうか、そういう結構かけがえのない時間になっていて、まあ、イルミオテンポっていう私の、和訳すると、私の時間って意味なんですけど、私の時間っていう、まあ、モチーフの中で、どういうことを描けるかっていうことをずっとやってるって感じです。で、その作品は、またホテルを描いてるんですよ。みんなのインタビューをもとに、なんかこう、一つのホテルを作ってるっていうことで、なんだろう、そのエピソード自体のことを描くというか、そのエピソードをもとに一つの建物を立ち上げてるっていう意味では、今回のフィリピンでの、シェアハウスを描くっていうのにもつながってる気がしますけどね。はい。
Okay, so with the Italians, we've been collaborating for many years. I believe about 4 or 5 years already that we've been doing work together. Now, what we do with them is that, you know, we bring our Japanese actors there, work with Italian actors, and vice versa. The Italians go to Japan, Japan go to Italy. So we do this back and forth all the time. And the thing is, I have these new discoveries every time. Talking to them, of course, we're very different, and the difference in our culture, in our DNA, is already part of, you know, each of our body. And so it's interesting that food, you know, just food, it's different. We have the different food. The point of view, you know, of how we think, where our thoughts come from, is also totally different. And just and of course, when I do work with them, we do a lot of interviews. And when I interview with them, there are things that I can pick up or learn or discover that I wouldn't get to discover when I'm interviewing just Japanese and only Japanese. And when I, you know, when I interview them, and I get a lot of realization that, hey, I can do that too. So there's a lot of discoveries that I have in interviewing and meeting these people. Now, it's also a very valuable time for me in working with them, doing these kinds of collaborative projects. And he mentioned il mio tempo, which is an Italian word, I guess, which means my time. So the motive is about that, no, my time. But this work is in a hotel setup. So, you know, everything that I got in the interview, the stories that I got, no, I put it in, like, it's building this hotel, and, you know, the story happens there. So in that sense, it's very similar to the work we just finished with the Philippine team. Yeah, so yeah, there's that connection. There's this similarity. No, that's it.
私もこれ見ましたけど、なるほど、全く今回の企画にバッチリつながってるじゃないですか。
そうですね。
これ、はい、またじゃあ、これ話はまた後半の方につなげさせていただくとして、一旦ここで次にゲランさんの方にお聞きしたいと思います。
So I actually also watched that play you mentioned, and yes, there is a lot of similarities between that play and the play that we just finished in the Philippines. But we'll talk about that later on. So now let's go on to talk to Mr. Guelan.
はい、ではゲランさんにお伺いします。ゲランさんは現在アテネオ・デ・マニラ大学という、有力な私立大学の劇団で、フィリピンを代表する劇団でもある、劇団のそのアーティスティックディレクター、お若くしてお勤めになってますですね。で、日本の皆さんにも多く、ご覧になっていると思いますので、自己紹介を兼ねて演劇を志されたきっかけなどをやはり伺えればと思います。
Okay, so Guelan, no, we know that you are at the Ateneo de Manila University, a very prestigious university in the Philippines. It's a private school. And so you are the artistic director of one of the well-known prestigious theater also in the country. So just for the Japanese audience who aren't maybe familiar with you, maybe you'd like to just give a short introduction of yourself, and also share with us what is your encounter, how you ended up in theater.
Okay. Yes. So I am actually currently part of the faculty, the Fine Arts Department. I teach mainly subjects related to the theater arts program of the Ateneo. I got into theater when I was a kid because my father is also a theater actor. And when I was young, he would bring me to his place, and that was kind of introduced me to the world of theater. But it was only when I got into Ateneo de Manila University in high school that I really joined the theater company. And that's where I was. That's where I started engaging as an actor, and then eventually a translator of Western classics like Shakespeare, Chekhov, and then eventually that was also my first time to direct in high school. So that's what kind of got me going in theater until I got to college, and now I'm teaching.
はい、 今のお話で印象的だったのは、結構フィリピンでやるんですかね、その演劇ファミリーっていうか、お父さんお母さんがやってるので、お子さんも継いでいく、継いでいくっていうか、同じ演劇に入っていくということはよくあるかもしれませんが、質問なんですが、ゲランさんから見て、お父さんの世代の演劇と自分たちがやってる演劇、どういうふうに違うのか、そしてまた何かこう、そこをなんか乗り越えていきたいとか、こういう違うことをやっていきたいというような、意思、お気持ちっていうのはどんな感じですか？
So it's interesting to notice that in the Philippines, it's common that, it's a theater family where the father, the mom is in the theater, therefore the children, maybe they didn't inherit it, but they end up in the theater as well. I would like to ask you, Guelan, no? I mean, having a father who is also in the theater, what do you think is the difference between the theater of your father's time and yours? And like, what are the things like maybe you wish to overcome or you wish to do differently from what they used to do then?
Well, I never got to watch the plays that my father did when he was young. When he was working with like great artists like Rolando Tino, who is a national artist in the Philippines. But the ones that I really saw when I was a kid, they were mostly classical Western works. Classical training is really apparent in the way they perform. I wouldn't say that there's a big difference between our mode of theater and back then, because we still do train ourselves in that classical mode. But if there's anything that I suppose I discern, a difference that I've discerned, it's probably right now in our time, I suppose theater has become more professionalized. Theater artists have taken up courses in universities, so there's a lot of influences from the West, and not only the classical traditional West, but also experimental Western practices like devising. There's experiments that are beginning to happen right now, and and there's also a theater boom. Very recent. There used to be a time when theater was consumed by, the upper classes in society, but now theater has become more popular. The middle class has become more engaged in watching plays. So there's and of course film has a big influence on how stories are told on stage. So there's a lot of experiments that's been happening recently. Especially by way of the Virgin Lab Fest, which is the annual festival of new works. So there used to be a time that plays being staged are usually either Western classics or Western works in translation or Western musicals. But now there's like a push for more original Filipino playwriting, and even plays from our Asian neighbors. So there.
はい、ありがとうございます。時間がないので、一つだけですね、ゲランさんの作品について伺いたいんですけども、藤田さんにはコクーンという芝居の話を伺ったので、ゲランさんの作品の中で、デサパレシドス、これ同じようにやはり現代史をテーマにした作品ですが、2018年のベストプレイにも選ばれてますけども、これについてちょっと伺いたいと思います。
Okay, so although we don't have a lot of time left, but we would still like to ask Guelan, no? Because we asked Fujita-san about his play Cocoon. So with you, Guelan, we'd like to ask about your play, the
Desaparecidas.
Desaparecidas, yes, Desaparecidas.
Sidas.
Sidas, yes, about your play, no?
はい、でフィリピンでは日本と少し違って、若いアーティストが政治的なテーマを真正面から扱うということが、多いような気がしますけども、この作品もマルコス大統領による戒厳令、 1980年代ですね。で、その中で反対運動に身を投じた主人公のその後の人生を描いていると思いますけれども、この作品についてのゲランさんの思い、そしてこの創作を通して、現在の若い世代に、特に若い世代にどのようなメッセージを伝えたかったのかということを伺いたいと思います。
Okay, so this play, no, the Desaparecidos, was also awarded the best play in 2018. Now, this play is the setting is in the 80s during the Marcos's martial law era, and the life of the people during that time. Now, for you to write this play, now, what kind of, I guess, message or what was your intention in writing this kind of play to the younger people, probably, no, that would be watching watched your work?
Yes, yes, I really decided to adapt. The story Desaparecidos comes from a novel by Lualhati Bautista. I adapted it into a play, thinking that our generation and the younger generation needed reminding of that dark, a part of our history, especially since, these names, Marcos, and the politicians during that time are kind of planning a comeback. They want to return back to power, and they do so by way of historical revisionism. So perhaps it is one of the roles of theater to make sure that we do not forget as a people. So I decided to stage that production so that what was usually just information that we learn in the classroom, names that we memorize and dates that we memorize can become, a vivid spectacle, a really visceral, experience inside the theater. So the hope is when it becomes an experience, the learning is deeper and we can get to move on from that dark part of our history.
なるほど。今お話を伺っていると、やはり例えば日本とフィリピンのアーティストの違いをあえて、というとすると、こういう現代史に対して、これいい悪いは別として直接的にエンゲージするか、間接的にエンゲージメントしているかという、そういうスタンスの違いがあるのかなというふうに思いました。
So in listening to both of our guests, no, in talking about their point of view of their theater work, it seems that Philippines and Japan, no, there's one maybe difference in how we approach things. One is on a direct approach. The other is more on an indirect approach. No, that is something that I learned today in our discussion, in your talk.
はい。ではですね、ここから最後の部分、今回のコラボレーションについて伺っていきます。まず藤田さんから。
So now we would like to go on next to to the third topic, no, which is about the collaboration that we did together. So we'll start with Fujita-san.
はい、今回のコラボレーションですね、まずフィリピン全土を地域区に従って4つの地域に分けて、6人ずつ、24人の俳優さんと、個別に1時間ずつのインタビュー、さっきイタリアでありましたが、インタビューをして、それをもとに戯曲を書いて作品化していくというプロセスを取られましたですね。では、この本作品の狙いと、これまでの作業の中で、いろんな発見があったと思うんですけども、そのあたりはいかがでしょうか。
Yeah.
Okay, so for this collaborative work, we subdivided the entire Philippines into 4 groups, and in those 4 groups, you had 6 actors from each of these areas, and you interviewed each of them for about 1 hour, just like how you did with your work with Italy, and then you, based on what you learned in the interview, you wrote and created this play. Now, I'd like to ask you, Fujita-san, about I guess through your process, what was your purpose in doing this, and what were your discoveries also in doing this project?
すごい楽しかったです。で、24人いるので、ちょうど本当24時間インタビューしてた3日間だっけ？違う、5日間だ。5日間かけて24時間、インタビューして、で、僕自身初めてフィリピンの に住んでいる方々と喋ったので、結構、あ、そういう感じかって結構驚くことがたくさんありましたね。まあでもなるべく、まあ、今の状況でこう、ズームでしか繋がれないとはいえ、皆さんが言った、料理は作るようにしてたし、ここで。すぐ作るようにしたりとか、あと、まあどういう感じなのかなってことを、こう想像して、自分なりに、まあ本を読んだりとか、そういう感じで、準備は進めてたんですけど、まあ結局でも、なんかまあやることは、まあさっきも言ったイタリアの皆さんと、作ってたり、あとまあ日本でも、いろんな東京以外の地方で、ワークショップするときと、まあなんらあまり変わらない作業ができたなとも思っていて、そのまあインタビューしながら、その人たちの生活を想像しながら、一つの建物を作っていくっていうことが、またフィリピンでもできたので、なんかそれが、まあ結果すごい面白かったですね。はい。
Okay, so what I could say first of all is that I really had fun. I really enjoyed. These are 24 actors, 24, that's 1 hour interview, that's 24 hours of interviewing. I spent 5 days. And within that 5 days, the 24 hours to interview them. And of course, it was my first time to talk to anyone from the Philippines. And so there were things that I'm like, oh, really? Or wow, or something surprising or realizing. And so, and although it was, just through Zoom, because there's this distance, I still tried to make sure I could understand things, which is why when they talked about food, I immediately had them cook it so that I could eat it and taste it. So yeah, that's how it was. But of course, other than that, I would read books. I would also go, imagine what they were going through when when that situation they shared was about. But also, what I did in terms of what we did physically, it's quite similar, or really, as we talked about earlier, with what we did with Italy. And also when we do workshops in other parts of Japan, not outside of Tokyo, we also do workshop there. And so the process was actually quite similar to what I'm always used to doing. So in interviewing, these participants, yes, I was able to imagine what their life is about, and by learning that, it was like, again, the process of like building, creating a building or a place to stay, so to speak. Yeah, so that was my experience, and to get to know the Philippines. So yeah, that's it. No, that's my experience.
それでどういう作業をしたかというと、まあ本当に質問は一つで、皆さんが今住んでるお家ってどういう間取りですかっていう質問しかしてないんですよ。で、その間取りを聞いていくことしかしてないんだけど、その間取りを聞いていくと、もともと幼い頃に住んでたお家は、火事で焼けてしまってとか、なんかその間取り以外のなんかこうエピソードが、なんか別に僕が聞いてないのにみんな話してくれたから、なんかテキストも面白くなったなと思って、なんか結構明るかったですね、皆さん。話しててもなんかすごく気持ちいい人が多くて、かなり疲れたけど、結構やってて、愉快に、楽しく作業できたのが、なんかすごい、なんて言うんだろうな。なんかさ、新しい土地と出会うときに、これを知ったらその土地を知った気になってる感じはあんまり好きじゃないから、なんか、いくら、インタビューしても、知った気にはなれないというか、知ったつもりにはなれないというか、まあ本当50年とか60年とかそこで生活しないとわからないことがあると思うから、だからあんまり僕は結局よそ者だっていう、スタンスは崩したくはないんだけど、ただなんか話の内容というよりはみんなの話してる 感じ、雰囲気とかを感じて、これ自体がなんか、フィリピンの人たちなんだなっていうのを、なんかニュアンスで受け取った感じがあって、それはどこの土地とも似てないから、やっぱり。だからすごくフィリピンと出会えてよかったなって思ってます。
Okay, so just to share, what's the process that I did in my interviews? Actually, I only asked one question. What is the layout of your house? That's all I asked. But then it's interesting that in asking that question, the ones I interviewed would suddenly talk about, oh, you know what, the house I grew up before didn't look like this, or it happened, something happened there. So suddenly they're just talking about something else, no, other than the question I asked. And so, yeah, it's not like I went asking these specific questions, but they're the ones who were willingly sharing different episodes of their lives. And so, yeah, and so although it was, it was tiring for me as well, to interview all these things, it was something different in that I was able to discover things because but then I know that I didn't know everything about it. Like, I don't like it, the idea of like when I go to a place, I already know the whole country. Like, I don't want to have that kind of notion. And therefore, in this case, yes, I talked to a lot of people and I interviewed them, but I'm not going to say I know it all. I feel like I have to be there 40, 50 years. I have to live there 40, 50 years to really understand them, right? To really, really relate or understand or know what they've been through. So I still like the idea of keeping myself like an outsider still, put myself still like an outsider, but then understand what they're going through. And so, yeah, it was a very unique, yeah. And also it was interesting because Filipino, they were so like bright and happy, when they talk about things. So they're very fun when they share things, and so that was very enjoyable for me also in how they share, how they talk, because the feeling, they really express their feelings. It's very unique experience.
大変面白い話ですよね。で、生活の想像とか雰囲気を感じるってお話ありましたけど、やっぱ僕象徴的だと思ったのは料理ですよね。料理、藤田さんおっしゃったけど、作って、その日のうちに作って、味見されてたんで、本当びっくりしましたけども、ある意味そうやって異なる文化と接触するときって、自分の潜在能力も高めていく、引き出していくのかなと、そうやって理解とは分からないけど、理解していくのかなっていうのは、すごくよくわかります。私たち文化交流やってますんでね、とっても参考になりました。
So you also mentioned about, of course you got to really understand what they go through in life, what their life is like every day. And having said that, it's so surprising for me to hear that, when you heard about their food, you actually immediately had it cooked and you really tasted it. No, you really ate it just so you can really relate to it, I guess. And so in all these aspects, it's really about culture and how to really, I guess, understand or know. Well, I don't want to use the word know, but it's like when you taste their food, you kind of get to relate to or understand their culture as well. And so your process is quite interesting because we are, Japan Foundation, in the Japanese name, it's a cultural exchange organization. So it's very interesting, the process of Fujita-san for us, because that's our job.
タロイモの葉っぱをね、揃えるのが一番難しかった。タロイモの葉っぱを揃えるのが一番難しかった。
It was hardest for me to find gabi leaves for laing. For the laing.
では、ゲランさん、今回、翻訳もね、されていますし、けど、今回のプロジェクトに参加されて、どのような発見があったか、感想とか伺いたいです。どうですか？
So, Guelan, you also participated in this project. You are the one who translated, the script that he wrote. So, how we would like to also know, how it felt, your reaction, I guess, or how you felt about being part of this, going through this process.
I was very excited because of many reasons. One of which is when I was contacted by Japan Foundation to join this project, I was given like a clue as to how Fujita-san writes his plays. So with the interview process, and I really related to it because in my own practice, I do something quite similar. Like I go through workshops with actors, and then through that workshop, then that's when I create a script. So I was really very excited to kind of, join in a project that somehow is same in spirit with how I do things here in my own practice. And apart from that, I am a big fan of Japanese playwriting with its austerity, its simplicity, but at the same time, simmering underneath that seeming silence and straightforwardness is actually a lot of emotion. We Filipinos, we tend to write emotions. We love writing characters speaking out, their feelings. So it was an exciting notion for me to kind of write, because in translating it, it's rewritten in Filipino. So the idea of writing something in Filipino, but with a Japanese heart, maybe a Japanese spirit, that combination, I think, is wonderful, and it's evidenced by the Zoom shooting, the Zoom filming that I attended this afternoon. It's really interesting, and the actors get to do something that they don't usually do in Philippine theater, because as I said, we're used to big emotions, but here they're kind of tasked to kind of keep it down and just be chill and realistic. But there's still moments in Fujita-san's script and moments in the performance of the actors when there's genuine poignance, I think. I dare say even dramatics that comes out, but in a muted, very simple, very Japanese tones.
なんか、ちょっといいですか？
どうぞ。
なんか、でも、まあ、いつも通りのワークショップをしたみたいなことは言った後に、これを話すのもあれなんですけど、やっぱり今コロナ禍で、コロナ禍だから、まあ、現地に行けずにこう、ズームでつながったっていうのもあるけど、コロナ禍だから、聞き出せたこともたくさんあったなと思って、やっぱりまあ、日本の僕らも今、演劇界もそうだけど、演劇界だけじゃなく、まあ、社会全体が不安じゃないですか。でもその中で、どういうふうに芸術とか表現を考えていこうっていう不安はなんかすごい似てる気がしたし、そんな中でみんな、家の中でどうしようかって考えてたのが、まあ、インタビュー中にすごい爆発してた部分もあってで、あとまあ本当に日本人とちょっと違うなと思うのは、結構やっぱりそのインタビューの中でも結構政治的なこととか、政治に対しての不満とかを結構あからさまに爆発させてたし、そういうのも聞けたのもすごい僕としても経験としても良かったですね。僕とまあかなり考えもみんな近いなとも思えたのも嬉しかったし。うん。
It's strange for me maybe to say this after I just said that, the workshop I did for the Philippine team is exactly the same as what I did with the others. But to be honest, maybe it's because of the pandemic. Maybe because we had to do it through Zoom. But and the questions that I asked or the answers that I got, maybe it's a reflection of what's happening, because Japan theater, maybe everywhere, there's this certain uncertainty or anxiety that everyone has, and so it seems like we're all having this similar experience. The actors were having similar experiences in which they're at home, they can't go out, and so every day they're thinking, what are we gonna do? What to do now? What are we gonna do now? So there's this anxiety that they feel at home. So when I was doing this interview, it was interesting that for some of them, that anxiety really erupted during the interview. They really expressed their uncertainty, and it was interesting that quite a number of them really expressed political, perspective, their dissatisfaction and all that. They were very open in actually expressing to me all those feelings and dissatisfaction. So for me, it was something of an experience, and it's an experience that I would value. And I'm actually thankful, I'm actually grateful that, this is how we did this project, and I'm actually very happy about it.
お話を伺っていると、やっぱりこれよく言われることですけどね、一般同じものと、それから全然表現の方法とか異なるもののこのバトル、この両方がやっぱりあってこそ、こういう、国際共同制作っていうか、国を越えて文化を越えてやる作業の醍醐味、面白さがあるんじゃないかなというふうに改めて思いました。
はい。
So it seems that, there are always that similarity between two things, and there are also differences in two entities. And so even when we talk about international collaboration, we go beyond culture, right? Beyond country. And so it was interesting to see again, that kind of yin and yang, I guess I'll use that term, yin and yang, in this project. It was very interesting for me to see that again.
はい。では最後にせっかくなんで、ゲランさんから何か藤田さんに質問とかありますか？一つぐらいどうですか？
Okay, so lastly, let's take this opportunity, Guelan, if you have one question, we'll have time for one question that you'd like to ask Fujita-san. Here's your chance.
Oh, okay. Perhaps I'd like to ask some more about Fujita-san's other, experiments with the process. Maybe more about how how he interviews actors to create a script. Because as I said, it's also an undertaking that I do in my own processes. So maybe there are some. Or maybe next time we can even, talk more off camera about we share practices and stuff like that. Maybe a bit more about this process.
インタビューというか、本当に結局心がけてるのは、インタビューとはいえ、本当にドキュメンタリーとしてその人のエピソードをいただかないことですね。本当にその人の話を本当のように話すっていうよりは、自分の中でちゃんとフィクションにできるエピソードを自分の中で抽出して、自分の中でろ過しながら、物語を立ち上げていくっていう方向にしないと、ノンフィクション作家っぽくなるというか、ドキュメンタリーをやるわけではないので、ちゃんとどういうふうな形で、エンターテインメントになるかとか、フィクションになるかってことを常に考えながら聞いてるから、インタビュー中はすごい楽しいんだけどどっかで、そのエピソードはその人のエピソードなんだけど、もう自分のフィクションの中の一部分に取り込むっていうのを同時にやってるというか、そうしないと、逆に失礼というか、ただ、作詞になっちゃう。その人の面白いエピソードを面白がってるだけになっちゃうから、そこはすごい気をつけながら、やってますね。
Okay.
はい。
Maybe not what I do differently or otherwise, but more on what I keep in mind when I conduct these interviews. So what you have to remember is that when you conduct an interview and then you just whatever you heard, if you turn exactly what that episode or that story said exactly into a play, then that's a documentary. Now we have to remember that you have to change what you learned into fiction. Really, let it steep inside you, right? Inside you, and then you have to make sure that you're creating a story. So you take it, you digest it, and then you come up with a story. Because if not, you will have no distinction with a non-fiction writer. It would be the same. Or a documentary, you become a documentary writer. Now you have to remember how to make this interview, what you got, an entertainment, right? How to create entertainment, how to create fiction. So in my case, maybe it seems like when I was interviewing, I was just having fun in that moment. But to be honest, I'm already thinking, while listening, I'm already thinking how to create this into a fiction. So from that interview, it's more of, okay, I have this fictional image in mind, and okay, where will I put, okay, this story, where can I put in that fiction space that I created, what that episode, how could I put it in a fiction in my fictional space, no? So it's not that I was just enjoying the interview, but it's really more of really having the right perspective in writing.
だから今回も全く一緒に住んでるわけのない人たちのことをもう一緒に住まわせてるわけだから、その時点ですごいフィクションなんだけど、僕も聞きたいことあるんだけど、いいのかな？
どうぞどうぞ。
Okay. So that's why, you know, even this work that we just finished, right? It's six total strangers. They don't live together, right? But then I made it into a play that they live together and they share this time together. So totally became a fictional work. No, it's not anymore something. It's not an adaptation of what they did, right? So yeah. So there. But then Fujita-san said, I also want to ask something. Can I? So I think yes.
Of course.
どうぞ。
Of course.
なん
Of
か、
course というと。
今回、これ、この作業が、この作業でフィリピンとの関わりが終わるとは思ってなくて、この先も、いろんなプロジェクトがつながると思ってるからやってるんですけど、なんかやっぱ今回、とても難しいなって関わってみて思ったのが、やっぱり言語の多さな気がするんだよね。だから翻訳って言っても、大変だよなって思って、何が大変だというか、伝わるかどうかで言えば英語でよかったり、なんかざっくり言えばフィリピアノ語でいいとかっていうことは、なんとなく、このスタッフの皆さんと話してて分かったんだけど、俳優と何か共同制作するときに、俳優が一番いい、なんだろう、馴染んだ言葉を選んでもらうとか、そういう言葉を選ぼうとすると、これって結構な選択肢があるってことじゃない？この作業をやって皆さんのこと、アドバイスもらいながら思ったのは。だからフィリピンと共同制作するって言っても、なんか考えることがすごい多いなと思うんだけど、ここで翻訳って言っても、何を翻訳何をどう翻訳したの？結局、
Okay.
作業をしてみても分かんなかったんだけど、すごいなと思う。
難しい質問ですよ。
Okay. Mr. Suzuki said it's a great question, so prepare yourself. No? Okay. So this is the thing. Fujita-san said, this is the thing. I believe that this is not the end of my involvement, no, in a collaboration with the Philippines. No, that's also another reason why I am doing this collaboration, because I expect it to continue. Now, in doing this project, the one thing I found quite difficult was the number of dialects that your country has. So even when they talk about translation, we were talking about multiple languages. And, you know, but then I understand, they explained to me, the people around me explained to me that to be understood by everyone, we can just use English or Filipino, and that's okay. But in working with the actors, I realized that, you know, if we talk about whatever is comfortable for you to express yourself, then it could be in their individual or their own dialect. That will be used, no? So then I realized there are so many choices of dialects that, you know, they can choose or they will use if they were told that. So I was wondering that, you know what, I was thinking, if I do collaboration with the Philippines, that's going to be pretty, you know, a challenge for everyone if we Japan and Philippines collaborate. Because yes, I know that you translated, but how do you translate? What do you translate? Like how do you know what language to use and all those things? No, that's the part that it was hard for me to grasp in terms of translation because of the many dialects that you had to deal with. So how does it work? What do you do in the Philippines?
Well, yes, like for example, I remembered when the translation process was about to start, when I first read the script, my initial questions were for the Visayas and the Mindanao parts of the of the script. Should we translate it into Filipino, or should we translate it into Bisaya or whatever language the actors really spoke in? But it was explained that, you know, due to practical reasons, we had to choose either English or Filipino, and they settled with Filipino. But the thing about Filipino is, if you talk about conversational Filipino rather than, you know, literary or dramatic Filipino, you're really talking about what we call Taglish, which is this oddball combination of English and Tagalog. And I think that's also true with the other languages, because the thing about, you know, the Philippines, it's not only dialects, but they're actually different languages, right? So there's also Bisaya mixed with English, etc., etc. So I do acknowledge Fujita-san's problem, right? On the other hand, it can be a fun problem, because then it would mean working with many translators at once, which I actually really encourage. You know, the notion that your play becomes archipelagic. It's an archipelago rather than just, you know, monocultural. That's really interesting. So maybe that can be the stage 2 or the stage 3 of Mr. Fujita's script.
しょうもないなと思ったのだから、なんか結局さ、だからフィリピンの俳優と作りましたみたいな一言で言えないじゃん。なんかじゃあもうツッコミどころと、その言葉に結構ツッコミどころ多いなと思ってて、フィリピンのどこの俳優とやりましたっていうことになってくる気がするし、じゃあどういうテキスト作ったんですかって言っても、いや、フィリピンの人たちと作ったテキストですよとは言えないじゃん、なんか。うまく言えば、その中でいっぱいあるわけだから。だからその複雑さは面白いなと思ったよね。うん。
Yeah. So yeah, it's really interesting, as you said, because from now on, you know, I can't just take anyone telling me, you know, I worked in the Philippines, so I worked with a Filipino actor. I cannot take it at face value anymore. I have to ask, which actor? From where? What language did you use? Like all these questions that will come about now, because you cannot just say, I work in the Philippines, I work with Filipinos anymore, because there is a deeper or more detailed identity that I have to now talk about. But then I also realized, yes, it's complicated, but that complication is quite interesting to me as well.
はい、この問題すごく重要で、やっぱりその文化の重層性っていうのは文化の本質的なポイントなんで、でも
さ、例えばさ、そうだよ、日本だってまあそりゃそうだよね。だって外国の人が来て、初めに滞在したのがもうまさに京都だったら、なんか関西弁混じりの日本語が普通になっちゃったりするとか、まあ方言っていうレベルも日本だっていろいろあるから、まあでもなんかもう多分それと全然次元が違う状態でフィリピンはあるってことを知れてすごい良かったなと思って。
この問題はしばらく追求を宿題として追求をしていきましょうということで。
So Fujita-san said that having said that, you know, it's different from Japan, it's actually similar experience, because let's say even in Japan, when they first opened their country, right, people went to Kyoto, that side, right? So people who only entered Kyoto, they only know the Japan that is Kyoto's Japan. So their Japanese is going to be the Kyoto Japanese. There's a Kyoto accent in their Japanese, right? So in that sense, it's also, I guess I can also relate to that there's that little similarity also. Yeah, so I get it too.
はい、ありがとうございます。では最後にですね、藤田さん、一言だけ今回のオーディエンスの方に向けて簡単にちょっと最後にメッセージをお願いします。
So lastly, now we would like to ask Mr. Fujita to give a short, brief message to our audience.
まあさっきも言ったように、なんとなくその東南アジアっていうとのクリエーションっていうのは僕らマームとジプシーはやったことなかったので、それの結構今回は始まりの企画だなっていうふうに思っていて、これで最後ではないんですけど、まず出会えたっていう成果はできたと思うので、まあそれをなんかシンプルに楽しんでもらえたらなって思ってます。で、まあ、そうですね。もうちょっと簡単にできるかと思ったけど、結構凝ったものになると思うので 当初話してたミーティングよりもだいぶ時間かかってるよね。結構、作り込んでるので、ぜひ、3日間楽しんでほしいなっていうふうに、まずは思いますね。はい。
Okay. So as I have said earlier, it is really my and my team's first time not to do a collaborative work with any Southeast Asian country. But then for me, I look at this project as a beginning, as a beginning of something. And I feel that this project is only my meeting or my encounter with everybody. So I feel like right now at this stage, I achieved encountering everyone. And so to be simple, I want everyone to just enjoy watching the work. But then, to be honest, I thought at the start when we were all discussing this project, I thought that everything will be so simple. Even the work will quite, turn out to be a simple type of play. But then it turned out to be something, I guess, deeper, and it took longer. It took much longer than we thought, and it became something of a deeper thing, deeper work. So I hope that this 3 days, that I hope everyone could enjoy the whole 3 days watching the work that we did.
はい、ありがとうございました。
なんで大丈夫？
大丈夫です。最後に作品の
Okay lang ba yun, sabi niya?
最後にですね、作品のタイトル、タハナン家のようなものにちょっと戻りますけども、昨今では時々親密圏、インティメートスピアって言いますけども、そういう言葉を時々聞くことがあるんですけども、コロナになって、個人個人が分断されやすい時代になって、その意味がますます大きくなっているのかもしれませんね。で、血はつながっていないけれども、他者に対して開かれた関係とか、空間はどのように築かれるのか、今回はさらにそれをバーチャルな空間で試みたわけですけども、その困難さ、今日いろいろそのお話がありましたけども、それから可能性の両面を見せてくれる作品ではないかというふうに思っています。とても楽しみですね。
そうかも。
はい、ね。
So for the what we discussed here and the work that we did, right now during this pandemic, there's a lot of talk about this intimate sphere that we talk about. Because probably we are now separated. We are separated from each other, or we are together with someone we're not related to. Like we're closer now to the people we're not related to. So a lot of things about space is, a big topic or a big thing in all our minds. And so right now, although this is virtual or this is online, we were able to, I guess, show conflicts. And also problems, maybe what we are going through could be also felt or experienced, in what we created, which is relatable to what we're going through right now.
本作品は、この後ですね、ちょうどこの後、今日、それから明日、明後日にわたって公開されます。当面期限なしで公開いたしますので、見逃した方は後日、またお知り合いにもシェアしていただければありがたいです。
So after this talk, we will share after this and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, this work that we've been talking about. But then we're also planning to air this on an unlimited time. And so if you missed this airing this coming 3 days, please watch yourself and please tell your friends as well to watch it later on.
はい。じゃあ、藤田さん、実はフィリピンには、頬と頬を合わせて挨拶するっていうベソベソっていう挨拶の仕方があるんですよ。今はできないんですけど、コロナが収束したらぜひこちらでいらしてその挨拶をね体験していただければいいと思います。
何それすごい。
I have to, Guelanさんにちょっと言わなきゃいけない。So Guelan, sabi ni Suzuki san kay Fujita san. You know, Fujita san, in the Philippines, there's this tradition of greeting each other with beso. Beso. That's why you should really, after the pandemic, you should come to the Philippines so you can personally experience beso.
Yes. That's why COVID has been extra difficult to us Filipinos.
ゲランさんが今、そうなんです。だからフィリピンは COVID 対策大変なんでしょう。ベソベソがあるから。
なるほど、そういう、なるほどね。 はい。
はい。ということで、皆様、お付き合いいただきましてありがとうございました。本日はどうもありがとうございました。
ありがとうございます。
So thank you everyone.